Hi.
We're back with another Thread Happy Hour.
I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Callista. If you didn't join us last week, we came on Facebook and YouTube Live and did about like a 30-minute Q&A session just to answer some FAQs or any questions that anyone had live while they were watching us. So while we're trying to do as many lives as we can weekly this month in celebration of National Sewing Month, we do come to you this week on a pre-recorded video because Stephanie is right now at...
I'm going to be at AQS Lancaster in Pennsylvania.
And I'm going to be at the Garden of Quilts in Utah. So we're not in the office this week, so we're pre-recording this video, so we won't be able to answer any questions while we're talking today, but still we want you guys to feel free to leave them in the comments because we'll still make sure we get to everyone's questions related to today's topic, which is going to be embroidery.
Yes, and luckily we did already receive a couple questions before today's recording, so we can absolutely start there. And I think as we talk about it, hopefully we can answer more of those like frequently asked questions that we see a lot and people come to ask for help for. So like Callista said, today is going to be on machine embroidery specifically. So I think there's a lot that goes into machine embroidery, and it's actually a broader topic than just like one weight of thread and then you pick a design and go. There's a little bit more to that.
Yeah. So without further ado, we're going to get into some questions. So we'll be reading some questions off our laptops on the side here. So I'll start with the first one, which I think is like a very commonly asked question. We've done a lot of talking about this as well, which is, metallic threads seem to snap or break on me when I embroider. How can I keep them from breaking? And I think especially as we move into the holiday season, this guy is going to come up very frequently in projects. So we'll kind of just go over some quick tips. We actually did do, I think, over like an hour-long thread talk just about metallic threads and everything there is to know about them. So we won't have the time to get into the nitty-gritty today, but you can definitely refer back to that YouTube video, which is on our channel, WonderFil Specialty Threads. Okay, so some quick tips on how to prevent your metallic thread from breaking. So metallic thread has really great memory. So it really retains its curl when it comes off the spool, and that's kind of what causes some issues when you go to stitch with it from time to time. So these tips should help you kind of reduce some of those frustrations. And the first thing I want you guys to do is slow down your speed. So when you're sewing with metallic, you definitely want to go slower. I kind of compare it to driving like through a playground zone. You really want to slow it down. Make sure speed is not the thing that affects the thread, especially if you're going to be doing any like a lot of starting and stopping. If the thread's coming off quick and then you stop, then like it's really easy for a lot of extra thread to come off the spool and get tangled up on itself. The second thing is spool position. We don't recommend the metallic thread going on the horizontal spool pin. We prefer that you either put it on a vertical spool pin, or if you have a thread stand, it's great to use a thread stand. This is a example of our thread stand here. So
this is called the thread tamer.
The thread gets drawn vertically here.
Yes, and then you can just put it through a little slot at the top. And basically all of these tips are to really help combat the issue of that thread memory.
And any thread slippage or pooling.
Exactly. We want consistent tension. And so this helps a lot with relaxing the thread. You can see it's already straightened out a lot. And it also won't affect the tension. If it pulls to the bottom, it will just still pull up as needed. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the second, well, kind of continuing off of like spool position, we also have a handy little tool called the Ultimate Thread Dispenser. So we can kind of demo that as well.
We like to call this our thread lazy Susan. So, I mean, another thing that can happen when you are pulling thread off the top of your spool is actually it's inducing another curl every time it goes around. It's just a bit of like a twist that keeps getting added to it. So the purpose of the Ultimate Thread Dispenser is to actually take that element away. So instead of the thread coming off a stationary spool, instead now we have a little lazy Susan that's going to basically unwind your thread. So once you put it on this little device, you bring the thread past the pin and then into this little slot right there. And then once it's all set, you just pull and you can see the thread unwinding there.
And it delivers the perfect amount of thread. And so the thread is coming off the spool the same way it was wound off. It's coming straight off the spool.
Yeah, and you can see it's a lot more relaxed here and doesn't have that curl still inside.
The next thing we want to talk about is needles. We always think about needles whenever we're sewing. You always want to change out your needle from time to time as well. But when you're sewing with metallic thread, you can either use something like a top stitch 9014 if you're using a metallic thread that looks like this. Obviously, there's some heavier metallic threads like our Glamour here, which would require an even bigger needle like 116. But for general metallic thread that kind of looks like this type of material, you do want to use something like a 9014 top stitch or a metallic needle. They're pretty much the same needle, so if you have one, you can use the other. Or if you don't have one, you can use the other.
Yes.
Okay? And the next thing as well is, especially with embroidery, you're adding a lot of density and kind of thread in one area when you're doing like especially like a filled in embroidery as well. So especially when it comes to using metallic thread, you want to reduce the bulk where you can so the thread doesn't have as much thickness or layers to go through, and it really helps the thread not kind of go through a lot of like abrasion. And so reducing the bulk on the back is really helpful. So you can use a lighter weight bobbin. This is our Deco Bob pre-wound bobbin, so it's 80 weight, so it's a lighter weight, so it really helps reduce that bulk in the back and makes, not just with metallic, but anything that you're doing embroidery with, a lot softer as well.
Yeah. If you tuned in last week, you probably also noticed we talked a lot about using pre-wound bobbins or a lighter weight in the bobbin thread, and that's because it's just kind of part of the foundation of how you're going to be sewing anything. So piecing, quilting, and embroidery as well. Having a really strong foundation in your bobbin thread is going to help a lot when you're doing embroidery, especially because you just want the most consistent result when there's so many stitches per inch, right? You don't want to have to deal with tension issues or skip stitches and stuff like that. So yeah, I think those are the main tips for using a metallic thread. Like Lisa said, if you have more questions on even like quilting with metallic, or you want to see some physical samples of metallic in quilts, you can check out our YouTube video on metallic thread specifically for like an in-depth explanation on metallic threads.
Yep. Okay. Next question is, I love the look of thicker threads, but my machine struggles with them. Is there a way to use 12 weight thread without the issues? So typically when you switch thread weight, you should always test your tension. So what I mean by that is you should stitch on a sample of what you're going to be sewing your final, like whatever your final project is going to be. So if you're going to be sewing on a quilt sandwich, I would test on a quilt sandwich. If you're going to be sewing on a piece of fabric and some stabilizer, test on a piece of fabric and stabilizer, so you get like consistent results when you're doing your testing to like your actual sewing. So then you also don't have to do as much unpicking if there is an issue. You can find out during the testing phase. But whether you're using a lighter weight thread or heavier weight thread, or even switching thread brands, or like even going up a little in weight or down a little in weight, you should always just test to make sure everything looks good anyways. So I always say like kind of just like check your tension, and that is a balanced tension, so your top thread's not getting pulled down, your bobbin thread's not getting pulled up. They're kind of like meeting in the middle where they should be, and that's kind of one thing I would get started with. And anytime you're also changing weights in thread, again, it comes back to needle size. Make sure you're using the right size needle. So I find that if you're seeing your thread do anything like shredding, it's typically a sign that you need to change your needle. Maybe you're using a needle that has like a small burr in it and you don't see, and it's not like obvious to the naked eye, and you've like sewn long enough. Maybe it's been like at least 8 hours of sewing. You want to refresh that needle anyway. So I always start by changing out the needle and also making sure it's the right size. So if you're going to be using a heavier weight thread, like a 12 weight, you definitely want to be using like a 9014 top stitch or like 116, something like that, to fit the size of the thread, as that could be causing some issues as well.
Yeah, and I would say another tip too is if you are using a heavier weight thread, not choosing a design that's too small or too dense. So how to combat that issue if you just like really love that design is you can increase the size of the design, but don't increase the number of stitches. So the goal here is that the default in the machine is probably set to like a 40 or 50 weight. So when you increase the size of your design, there's going to be more space in between, right? And they combat that by increasing the number of stitches when you increase the size of your design. But you want to make sure the number of stitches actually stays the same, because since you're using a heavier weight thread, like a 12 weight anyways, it's going to fill that space that originally would have been like just more 40 or 50 weight thread. So don't increase the number of stitches, but you can increase the size of the design.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is, do I have to clean my machine more often if I use cotton embroidery threads? So this is a great question because I think most people think of polyester or rayon when they go to do their machine embroidery, but cotton is actually also such a great option when you go to do machine embroidery, and it produces like more of a matte finish, and sometimes like depending on the design it can like look a little bit more like vintage or hand done as well because of like that natural look to it. And I would say when it comes to cotton, there is always going to be lint. That is just a characteristic of cotton, but what you can look for is a cotton that's been finished in the manufacturing process to be cleaner, so when you sew with it you will end up with less lint.
Yes. Basically, I mean, exactly what Krista said. Even the weight, if that's something that you're worried about, cotton, the 50 weight cotton, it falls right in between like that utility weight threads that are the most common for machine embroidery. So definitely don't be shy to try out a cotton and see if you like it in the design. I find that even just switching between cotton and rayon, even in my like hand embroidery, there's like really big differences. So try it as well for machine embroidery and you might really like the result.
Yeah. And if you guys didn't know, WonderFil does double gas all of our Egyptian cotton. So all of our threads are Egyptian cotton. They're also long staple. Long staple will also help reduce the lint, but on top of that, we do this process called double gassing, which we actually kind of slowly and gently burn off excess lint. So you get left with a very, very clean cotton, and that is something that is obviously going to be helpful for keeping your machine clean, but also I wanted to mention also like a mercerized cotton will give you a really nice kind of luster on the thread as well. So when you machine embroider with it, like that looks really pretty.
Yeah, so mercerizing also makes the color really saturated. So that's also just a really nice key term when you're picking your cotton threads. If you're picking one that's mercerized, like the WonderFil cottons, you're going to have good color fastness, saturated color, and it's also going to have still a really clean look to it as well, so it's not going to look fuzzy. But I wanted to kind of guide this question into a couple others that are kind of under a similar, I would say, like umbrella of deciding between materials and what types of thread to use for machine embroidery. For example, do I use cotton versus poly versus rayon? And now that we've talked a little bit about cotton, I think people choosing between polyester and rayon is actually a little bit more confusing, or people are like a little less sure when they're picking between one or the other. So maybe we can go into some details about that.
Yeah. Rayon and polyester both have shine. How do I know when to pick one over the other? So I would say, excuse me, this is kind of also related to another question, which is, what's the best embroidery thread for something that gets washed a lot, like towels or jackets? I would relate these questions to each other because when you're choosing one over the other, you also want to think about how that project is going to be used. So in the later question where they're going to kind of use it a lot more in terms of like things that are going to get washed often or used often or kind of just like worn a little bit more roughly, then you do want to use a thread like the polyester because it kind of holds up to that wear and tear a little bit better. But if you're going to just put it on a wall hanging, it's just going to be more of a decorative type of project, then I definitely think you can use either or. And in that case, I actually usually lean a little bit more towards the rayon because I think rayon has like a very pretty natural shine to it.
Yeah. And I would say to like dispel the myth of like rayon just like falling apart if it touches water, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So if you wash your rayon project, it's not going to fall apart. But
yeah,
like
and our rayons are color fast as well.
Yes. So our solid line of rayon threads, which is what Callista's holding here, we actually have a number of thread lines all made with rayon threads. And they look so nice in embroidery. But what I wanted to point out is rayon is actually dyed at the same temperature as cotton.
At WonderFil, at least.
At WonderFil. So it does not bleed easily at all. You know, and I did a little test on this myself because I like stitch a bunch of, I used a bunch of rayon thread and put it on my sock because I was like, well, it's getting rubbed up against my shoe. I'm going to be washing it a lot. And the color is still there after like 2 or 3 years. So I wouldn't worry about that. But I would say in terms of like overall longevity, you do want to be a little bit more delicate with your rayons. If it's going to be on a bag that's rubbing up on a bunch of stuff, perhaps polyester is a better option. If you're going to put it on a garment like a t-shirt, like it's going to be a logo or you want to monogram some stuff that's going through the wash a bunch, I would also suggest polyester. Ours is called Polyfast. But like what Callista said, if it's going to be a wall hanging, it's just going to be there to look pretty. If you're embroidering on a hat or something that's not going to get washed a ton, I would definitely say that these rayon threads are pretty unmatched. If you
can kind of see the shine difference. This one's more on the right-hand side, the rayon's more of a continuous shine, and the polyester kind of picks up pockets of light a little bit more.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're both shiny, but they are slightly different. If we're talking about like pure like luster and smoothness, then rayon is going to win that battle. But trilobal polyester is made to like be reflective to light. Yeah. So that's how it like grabs people's attention and has like this really nice brightness to it as well. And that's what the polyester is. So I do think when you're choosing between one or the other, aside from like aesthetics, thinking about how that will be used after you're done the project does play a pretty big factor.
Yeah. Okay, next question is, when I embroider small monograms, the letters always blur together. What thread keeps the details sharp? So, yes, most people only use a 40 weight for all of their embroidery. So when it comes to actually doing things that are smaller or more detailed, it actually is the time to think about switching to a different type of thread, because that will actually yield you a different result and finish. So it makes sense. If you're already doing something smaller and more detailed, you want to use a smaller, more detailed and fine thread. So when you're going to do like smaller lettering or smaller monograms and things like that, you want to consider maybe using like something like our 80 weight deco bob, because it's finer and it's going to help keep those lines a lot crisper as well. So if you have smaller text, you can still like read it and it doesn't kind of like all mash together.
Yeah.
And what's great about it is we've like tested it a lot too. Like you can even like push it smaller than like the original design even, because a lot of people don't realize there's something like an 80 weight thread out there that can really help make those differences.
Yeah, so it kind of relates back to that first question of using those heavyweight threads, especially if you want to like make a larger embroidery design. If you want to shrink the design, a 40 or 50 weight might actually be too big for what you're trying to achieve. So you can also choose just a lighter weight thread so you can maintain the detail of the design. And then one of the topics I also really wanted to cover is actually on freestanding lace too.
Oh, I was going to read that question next
Okay,
too.
go ahead.
Okay, I'll read the question. You can answer it then, all right? Okay, whenever I embroider lace, it turns out stiff. How can I make it softer and more flexible?
I would say there's a few factors that come into play when you're making freestanding lace, because all you're left with really is thread. So that's one element, but in order to make freestanding lace, you need a wash away kind of webbing, or like a wash away medium. And so when it comes to thread, if you're using a 50 weight and you think it's like still too stiff, like the satin stitch is a little bit too thick for what you're looking for, you want something really delicate, try using another thread weight, a lighter weight thread, and also using a lighter weight in the bobbin. Let's say instead of doing 50 weight top and bottom, you can do 50 weight on top, 80 weight on bottom. See how you like that level of softness. If you still find it a little bit thick, you can use 80 weight on top and on the bottom. Now, when you are choosing your medium, the wash away for freestanding lace, another really big factor is actually what type you choose, right? So at WonderFil, we have something called Lace Made actually in the back. You can see in the pink purplish box there. And the reason why Lace Made is different is because it's actually a little bit thicker than your usual wash away stabilizer. And you might be asking, why is that important, or why is that, like, how does that play a factor, right? So when you're making freestanding lace, sometimes one layer of the wash away stabilizer is not enough, and you have to put 2, or maybe you have to put 3 in so that your design doesn't like warp, basically. It doesn't want to pucker. So you have layers of stabilizer. But every time you add an additional layer of stabilizer, there's going to be a lot more differential movement that can happen while your embroidery design is getting stitched out, which is a big issue when it comes to freestanding lace, because your top and your bottom basically need to match perfectly, and you want to reduce any difference there is when those threads match up at the bottom, because you're going to be washing away like what it's being stitched on essentially, right? So that has to be really accurate. And because Lace Made is a little bit thicker, that's going to reduce the amount of layers you have to stitch through. So you can just put one layer of Lace Made in, do your freestanding lace embroidery, and then you can just wash it away and be left with your finished design, your final design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One final thing is, people didn't ask us this, but I wanted to bring it up, which is kind of like about the bobbin color.
Oh.
Because I think a lot of people, when they do embroidery, they just have like bulk white, bulk black, and like it just becomes a habit. Like people buy a lot of white and black embroidery threads. But if you're going to be doing a lot of embroidery and it's not always black and white on the top, I actually recommend getting more neutral colors, like something like an off-white, or like a taupe color, or a beige color, like nude, or like even like a sagey green color, typically grays, like they all blend really well. And I suggest this because sometimes you're going to get the odd pokey. And if you're using like white or black, they're like the ends of the color spectrum, and it's really easy to like see that contrast when it like pokes up amongst other colors of thread, and like see that contrast. So if you use like more of a neutral color, even if you do get pokies, you're less likely to see them very obviously. And as well, using that 80 weight in the bobbin, like the 80 weight deco bob in the bobbin, also helps reduce visibly seeing the pokies as much because the thread is a lot thinner. So the pokies are a lot less noticeable as well. So I just wanted to throw that in there as like food for thought. We didn't get a question, but I thought it would be like kind of just like an important tip to throw in there.
Yeah, we definitely want to drill in the fact that having that lightweight bobbin is going to be just incredibly helpful for your projects, especially if your machine can take the pre-wound. And so we mentioned this last week, but if you are interested in trying the pre-wound bobbins, we do have them in 4 sizes. So for the domestic machine, that's the class 15, the L size bobbin, and now we also have we call them B bobbins. So that's the Bernina jumbo bobbins.
Yeah.
AKA WonderFil's B bobbins. So there's those 3 for domestic machine. We do have a 4th, the M bobbin, but that's for long arming. So most likely you're going to be looking at any of the class 15, the L, or the B bobbin for your machine embroidery.
Yeah. Okay, so to celebrate National Sewing Month and to hopefully encourage you guys to try some different types of threads and different types of techniques. So since this week's theme is machine embroidery threads, all the machine embroidery threads will be 10% off from September 10th, which is today, through September 16th. And if you guys are watching today during our happy hour, for a 24-hour window only, you can get an extra 5% off with the code HHET5, and we're going to put that code up on the screen so you guys can see, and that's going to be 24 hours only, and only because you guys tuned in to watch this. Okay, so next week we'll be back live, and I believe I forget what topic it is. So like maybe just stay tuned and it'll be a surprise. Yes. But thanks for joining us again for another happy hour. If you guys have questions, please leave them in the comments, whether it's related to this topic or even last week's topic or even for future topics you want us to talk about. Just leave them there and we will get to everyone's questions.
Yes, and don't forget the additional 5% off is only for 24 hours. So if there's anything you need to stock up on, it's definitely an excellent opportunity to do so. But again, we had such a good time chit-chatting, and we'll be back live next week. So stay tuned for that as well. Make sure it's reminded on your calendars. But thank you again so much for hanging out with us today during our happy hour.
Yep, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.